This is going to be part 4 on the Red Rock Railroad, the N-scale layout that I've been working on. And this particular session is mainly aimed at lighting. That's layout lighting, not lighting up the individual little buildings and streetlights and stuff like that. But I mean creating an ambient light condition that mimics real light outside of your house. Typically, you've got your layout in the basement or a room in your house, and you've got some electric light that's illuminating your layout so you can see it. What I'm going to talk about is how to use LEDs to simulate skylight and sunlight. So let's jump in here. N-scale folded dog bone Red Rock railroading part 4. This image in the background is another picture of the Salt River Canyon bridges. If you're in northeastern Arizona, this is a good place to drop down in from the mountain ridges and have a look at this entire area. Very photogenic. This layout, and we're, again, the only part in play here is the 2/3 to the left. The dual reversing loops over to the right, that's not even started yet. So that red line about 2/3 over, that's where the current layout ends and future layout starts. And I do want to say that the folded dog bone does not include the outer track. So a standard folded dog bone would not include the track that goes all the way around the entire layout. That was added to allow me to, say, let a train run on the outer loop continuously like a cross country, then have another train running inside in the folded dog bone, just to give it a little bit more drama. And if you were doing DC instead of DCC, obviously you could electrically isolate the outer loop from the inner folded dog bone and control them separately if you're doing DC. Again, in a three-dimensional image of the layout, that is the portion that we're dealing with. This is the layout in kind of a quasi-finished state, and before I actually installed it into its permanent location. So at this point, it's really not anywhere near finished. The terrain is somewhat finished. Any buildings you see there, they're just setting there. They're not really attached. So there's no interior lighting to buildings. There's no overall lighting. There's no vehicles to speak of. You see couple steam pieces of heavy equipment there in the quarry. Other than that, and you see a train sitting on there, the Denver Rio Grande Western. Layout's not finished. So at this point, it needed to get moved into the permanent location. So I started by building a stand. Now, I realized that this looks pretty flimsy, and it is pretty flimsy at this state. As you manipulate it, you have to be careful how you torsion that 1x4 that goes from one end to the other. So you have to be careful how you pick this up and set it down. Now, typically, when I build stuff, I use lighter weight lumber, and then I glue and screw it together to give me the rigidity and strength that I need. So you see that the legs are 1x4s and 1x3s, and the 1x3s are butted into the 1x4s. That way you have kind of an L-shaped leg that's 3.5 by 3 1/4. So if you take the 2.5-inch 1x3 and butt it up against the 3.5-inch 1x4, that's the shape you're going to get. Now those legs, the two pieces, they're glued together, not screwed. So I glued them and clamped them, and that way I don't have screws. I'm not using up screws that really don't serve any purpose. And if I pull the screws back out, then you leave holes that are, kind of an unsightly blemish. And notice that I also attach the caster wheels. Now, I did get the caster wheels that have brakes on them, but due to the shape of the base of the leg, you have to rotate that caster wheel around to one of two sides in order to get your foot or toe onto that brake. Okay, a closer look at where the legs join, we'll call it the I guess, the apron. And I did not glue these because I wasn't 100% sure if these were the dimensions that I wanted. So I simply used, in this case, 4 screws. You only see 2, but there's actually 4. 2 going from each facet of the leg into part of the apron. And you see the caster wheels have 3 screws going into the vertical leg elements and 1 screw going into that 1x3 block. Because I took a 1x3 block and I glued and clamped it in there, and then once it was set, I could attach the caster wheel. Once the caster wheels are attached, then I simply flipped it over. I apologize for the blurry picture. So once the stand was at this point, I attached a temporary apron board across the front. Now you'll notice that I have a apron and a skirt 1x4s on 3 sides. You're looking at the front, so that 1x4 across the front is temporary. And the height of this stand, including the height of the caster wheels, was determined by me setting in that creeper and raising my hands up to what is a comfortable work height above the floor for my shoulders and arms to work on the wiring underneath of the layout. Then I measured that height with a tape measure and then designed this stand accordingly. Now I realize that there's a compromise there, because if you make it too high, then it's not comfortable. I mean, you're going to stand and look at it, but you're not going to sit and look. If you're sitting in a chair, it's too high for you to see. So you have to be standing up or sitting in a stool to actually enjoy the layout once the layout's installed. At this point, the stand is ready to have the layout placed on it and attached to it. I do want to point out some things that I'm going to change, though. In this area, notice that there is an airspace between those diagonal braces and the skirt. I could just put a block of wood, 3/4 inch, 1x, in between the skirt and the diagonal, and that would stiffen it up. But instead, I think I'm going to flip the diagonals, so instead of going from the top front to the bottom lower, I'm going to flip it around to get a little bit more strength in the front leg. And or I might just add another diagonal in there, so I have a diagonal in both directions. The goal was to make the access to the bottom of the layout as open as is possible. So that's why the front, this apron board going across the front will get removed once the layout is attached, to give me the maximum headspace to slide under here to work on it. Okay, now I've got the layout setting on the stand, and I've removed that temporary 1x4 across the front, and I've started to erect the dust cover frame. Layouts like this, and the smaller the scale, I think the worse it is. The details on N-scale layouts are so fragile that cleaning it with vacuum cleaner and a brush, you're going to remove some of your ground cover and maybe break off a detail here and there every time you do it. So I decided that this layout's not that big. I'm going to put a dust cover over it that will protect it from dust when I'm not using it. And I'm also going to use this frame, install my skylight and my sunlight. I want you to notice the cleats on this end that attach the layout to the stand. So once these cleats were attached on both ends, you're only looking at one end here, then I removed that apron 1x4 off the front to give me the maximum headspace to get under it. Also, you notice the messy wiring. There's a reason why it's messy, and that is the wires are better too long than too short. When I'm wiring up stuff like this, I don't worry about the wires being too long and looking like this, because once I'm satisfied with what's going on where I can't get to it easy later on, like underneath the layout, then I come back and I re-terminate these wires to get a more harmonious appearance, so it looks better and easier to work on. Okay, when I added the vertical struts there, if you want to say struts, for the dust cover, I had to add cleats in certain locations so I could attach the vertical elements of those dust cover frames exactly where I wanted them, because I didn't want them to interfere with the layout. I wanted to stay out of the way of certain features on the layout, including, especially on the other end, where I have a whole removable section so I can get into derails or track maintenance inside the mountain, so to speak. And this is another spot. This is the back side. This is the front, and this is the back. So you see I've added a cleat there. That particular cleat actually extends out past the leg, so I could put the vertical element of the dust cover frame exactly where I wanted it. Okay, now back to, and by the way, there's that cleat down there that I just showed you a picture of. I sat the layout on there, then I added 4 cleats that strap down or screw down, so to speak, integrate the layout with the stand, and that stiffens the stand up quite a bit. So once I add a couple more diagonal braces on the front legs, then it's rock solid. 2x4s are ugly. If you want to use 2x4s, more power to you. I mean, it is less expensive than using a 1x3 and a 1x4 for a leg. The bad thing is 2x4s, you know, wood is hygroscopic, so it's going to move and change shape over the years. If you take 2 pieces of wood and they're biased, meaning the grain one's one way on one and a different way on the other, then as they go through their hygroscopic cycle, that's, you know, you get more humid, it absorbs moisture, and then it changes shape a little, and then it dries in a new shape. When you go through those cycles, if you have bias in the wood, like plywood, it's less likely to change shape. All you see here now is really the 2 frames on each end that are going to support the dust cover and the lighting. The next step was to make the LED runners, and these are 1x2s that are going to span the entire length of the layout. There's 4 of them. These 1x2s, we're going to lay them on their side, which means that the weight, which isn't much, will cause them to droop in between the ends over a period of time. So we take a piece of 1/4-inch plywood, and you notice that I'm gluing and clamping these, not screwing them. We take a piece of 1/4-inch plywood and we clamp and glue it to one edge, and this serves 2 purposes. It stiffens the board, so it's going to reduce any droop over a period of time, and also this 1/4-inch plywood will extend down to keep the LEDs out of your eye. So when you're standing and looking at the layout, you can't see the LEDs. You cannot see them because they're behind this. Now, I also painted the inside of them white just to give them a little reflectance. It wasn't necessary, just a habit. Notice also that the plywood doesn't go all the way to the end, because these notches right here, if you want to call them that, they have to set on those frames. Now, at this point, I sat them on there and screwed them down and then marked them. I apologize for this bad image. It was at this point that my camera went south, but I didn't know it. All these pictures have these streaks in it, but you can see how these LED runner strips are mounted end to end on the layout. On top of that, if you look at the top of this, you see these 4 1x2s extending across with the plywood stiffeners on them. I'm going to place over this a cap that has 1x2s with plywood stiffeners, and then a masonite panel, you know, it's just under 1/4 inch. I use masonite for 2 reasons. One, it's dark, and the other is it's cheap, and it's relatively light. So I made a frame that settles down and sits completely over that frame that was made with 1x2s, 1/4-inch plywood, then covered with masonite. Well, this video is getting too long, and I realized I wasn't going to be able to cover the subject of light, LED lighting, and sunlight, direct lighting, indirect lighting, etc. in a reasonable length of time. So I'm going to drop it here. I'm going to pick it up with another part specifically on the lighting. Thank you.